You're watching TVC Breakfast. Last week, President Muhammadu Buhari assented to the Nigerian Correctional Service Bill 2019, repealing the Prisons Act and changing the name Nigeria Prison Service to Nigeria Correctional Service. Well, Ita Enang tells us more.
The prison system in Nigeria has long been criticized as not designed to rehabilitate inmates who most times come out worse than they came and inevitably go back to crime. This is mainly due to the inhumane conditions they are housed and lack of facilities to really train prisoners to turn a new leaf. But the new Nigerian Correctional Service Act aims to change this. It is one of the two bills signed into law on this day by President Muhammadu Buhari. There are, according to the Act, two main faculties of the Correctional Service, namely A. Custodial Service, B. Non Custodial Service.
The non-custodial service is intended for reformation. Persons do not stay in custody. You allow for mediation, conciliation, community service as punishment as will be ordered by the court. The custodial service is the service that takes you into custody in a confinement.
The Act is expected to cover the most controversial part of Nigeria's prison system, which is overcrowding, by vesting in the correctional service officer the powers to reject an additional inmate to his facility after notifying the appropriate authorities that his facility is full.
Where there is overcrowding in any prison, the correctional service officer, the person in charge of that state or the federal capital, is to notify the Attorney General, notify the Chief Judge of the state that there is overcrowding in the prison, and he is not to take in any other inmate. The law authorizes him not to take in any other inmate.
The law provides that any revenue made by an inmate will be divided into three. The person who produces will take 1/3.
Part of the first thing that happens in the correctional service is that when you enter, all your particulars are taken and it registers in the central system. So wherever you are, that is why when somebody is having an appointment or they want to do a search of you, they will go to do a search of fingerprints and anything, whether there has been any record about you.
The essence of the Act is to ensure there is enough funding for the correctional service that will take care of the welfare of inmates and workers and eliminate corrupt practices in supply of food rations. Ita Enang, TVC News, Abuja.
Well, joining us now is the National Coordinator, Legal Defense and Advocacy Project, LEDAP, Chino Obiago. He's also a senior advocate of Nigeria. Also joining us from Abuja is Dr. Uju Agomo, the Executive Director, Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action, PRAWA. Madam and gentlemen, you're welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
All right. Let me begin with the senior advocate here with me now. Prison officials have lauded this renaming, but for prison reforms advocate like yourself, what does this really mean?
It means a lot. Remember, the journey started 18 years ago, in 2001, when the Amendment Bill of the Prison Act was introduced, produced by a committee led by Mr. Olawale Fapohunda, the Attorney General of Ekiti State. There are three remarkable innovations in the law. First is the introduction of correctional services. The name correctional services sends a message that prisons is for reforms and not for punishment. The second is the introduction of non-custodial regime, which is not a new thing because Administration of Criminal Justice Act provides for non-custodial measures like community service, probation, parole, and so on. Now, what the new law has done is to provide a legal basis for enforcing those provisions in the Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2015. But more importantly for me is the empowerment of the prison to reject inmates when there is congestion. And here we're talking about remand prisoners, because 70% of those in prison are those who have not yet been tried, remand.
Right.
And courts keep pushing them.
let me run your ideas now, or your stance, along with Uju Agomo there, representing Prawa. So for you, what are, the key elements, that make this renaming a breakthrough, as many have called it?
Is the question for me?
Yes, it's for you, Uju Agomo. Please carry on.
Yes, I'm not sure I
what for you is the breakthrough,
clearly.
or what for you are the key elements that make this renaming a breakthrough?
Oh, they're critically, there's so many breakthroughs that one can deduce from the new legislation. First, as I said a couple of places, that beyond just the notion of having a focus on corrections, there is now a platform which will enable the court to more easily award sanctions that are non-custodial measures, so that minor offenders can at least not be put in prisons, rather than rather than the community, which is the best place to have them serve their sentences, because of the fact that they are low risk. There are also other provisions that relates to the treatment of mentally ill prisoners, which is really very progressive. Things relating, so for example, now you will have the establishment of mental health review board in all the states of the federation. That way, the capacity gap and challenges that are brought about by having civil lunatics and the so-called civil lunatics or criminal lunatics in prisons will not be, hopefully will not be there anymore. Then again is the whole notion of making the prisons more reactive in terms of sending off early warning signals when the prison population is going
but let me push another question now before we get to the top of the hour. How will this initiative aid the speedy disposition of cases? That's been the bane of many advocates who have been calling for reforms in prison. So how will this help?
Now, clearly, with the issue around criminal justice system, you need several players, certainly. We already know that we have the Administration of Criminal Justice Act 2015. There are also many states that are passing the Administration of Criminal Justice law. So that's important. So you need different players to come to bear. However, when you look at the, say, for example, the provision of Section 12 of the new law, the Nigerian Correctional Service Act of 2019, you will notice that now, when the population is going beyond the capacity, there are key persons that need to be immediately notified. So, one, you notify the chief judge. Two, you notify the state, that's the state chief judge, the state attorney general, the prerogative of mercy, the Criminal Justice Administration Committee, and other relevant agencies, so that they can begin to do something around this.
All right.
Secondly, too, is that there is now a requirement for the Controller General of Prison to regularly convene certain partnership intervention and coordination meeting around the areas that concern what the prisons can do. So again, it requires multi-sectoral partnerships.
All right. Dr. Uju Agomo, we appreciate your contributions about this correctional services initiative in the country now. Dr. Agomo is the Executive Director, Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action. Many thanks. Coming back to you, Leonard Silk, talking about, it gets to a point now under this new regime where the Comptroller of Prison is mandated not to accept any more prisoners. Where do they go eventually? So how will this work?
Now, it will force the state, judiciary, the police, the investigators to engage in proper case management. Okay. The Administration of Criminal Justice Act, which this law is to complement, provides a time frame for remanding people under AGJA, a maximum of 28 days. So the courts cannot just push people into prison and forget them there. So once you're obtainable before. So once you put them, you send them to prison for remand, you must have a time frame, because the prison will not accept more when the capacity is full. In any event, almost all the prisons are overfilled to their capacity. Unless new prisons are being built, as been announced.
Promised.
Then, of course, so we need the judiciaries at the state level, we need the ministries of justice, you need a multi-sectoral approach to making this law to work. And if it does, it will reduce the congestion in prison, it will reduce overuse of pre-trial detention in our criminal justice system.
Thank you very much.
And I'm going to start with you from Abuja before we come into the studio. Almost 20 years when this correctional center bill has been in the works. I wonder why it took so long, but it is here right now. What is going to be different when it comes to the approach, apart from the administrative process and all of that? What is going to change about the prisons service or the correctional service as the name is right now?
Yeah, so many things will change. But first to say that this current law that was signed by Mr. President actually emanated by having 4 different bills before the Senate and additionally 4 other bills that were before the House of Rep that the stakeholders and all of us worked on to actually harmonize to get to this point. But it's been a long while, and part of it is different things, which I will not bore you now discussing why we are there. But anyway, we're here now with the bill signed into law by the President. So one of the things that we would see in the bill is that you find, as you have mentioned already in the background, that there is already the platform that will help fast-track the implementation of non-custodial measures. We also find several provisions in the bill that make it more easier for Nigeria to be more in compliance with international human rights standards in relation to treatment of prisoners, including the Mandela rules, and then the Bangkok rules and all the rest of that. Then, in more practical terms, let me just give some few examples. You know, you cited the session that talks about the powers of the prisons to say, you know, I can't take more persons if the prison population is reaching its limits. It's important that certain things trigger. So it's like an early warning signal.
Yeah.
But that provision is not only for awaiting trials. It's also applicable to sentenced prisoners. So which is actually something that can encourage more of the use of the non-custodial measures, so that prisons will only be used for those who actually are high risk. Now, there are also provisions within the law that requires the issuance of certificates, you know, a proof of service for every time that you have a production warrant issued, because we have instances where you go to the court and the prisons would say we didn't get the production warrant and that's why the inmate is not in prison.
Okay.
All
right, let me put you on hold a little bit, Dr. Aguma, and come to the studio now to the senior advocate. Now, you will agree with me that when it comes to the laws, when it comes to all of those standards and benchmarks, Nigeria is not in lack of laws and all of that. But the approach to this, a lot of people will say funding is very central to this, because the way the prisons service have been, or the prisons have been before, and what is being recommended now in the correctional service, a lot of money needs to go into it to be able to achieve the new benchmark. What do you see? What do you foresee in that regard? What should change when it comes to funding?
Yes, you're very right. I mean, correctional services, non-custodial services are not new to our law. The criminal procedural laws, the criminal procedural code, the Administration of Criminal Justice Act, even the Prison Act of 1948 has those provisions. There's provision for probation officers, for community service officers, and so on. The question is, are these being implemented? The answer is no. The prison authority has probation officers who can manage non-custodial sentences? Do they have social workers, social welfare workers who can manage community service sentences? So it comes back to funding. It comes back to political will to put funds where the laws are. It's not enough to just make laws. Having said that, the states manage criminal prosecutions. Most criminal prosecutions are done by the states, but the prison is a federal institution. So it's a constitutional asymmetry that needs to be addressed. If the prison says they're not going to receive inmates sent by state courts, what would the state do? They can't force the prison to accept those inmates. The state will be stranded. They can't release those people home. So I think it's important that states begin to think about demanding that they also have their prison facilities. Okay,
and let me stand on that to Dr. Agombo here. There has been a lot of advocacy recently that there should be federal prisons, state prisons, and even local government prisons so that there can be better administration of the system. What do you recommend in that regard?
Yeah, I think there are merits to the fact that you need to make sure that the facilities that provide corrections are close to the people as possible. At this moment, we have some states that even at this that are also intervening to provide services. Now, the truth is we have prisons now in many states, in short, and across the whole country. You have satellite prisons, which are in local regions where you do not have, you have courts, but you don't have normal standard prisons. So you do have that. Now, what we're looking at is a situation whereby until we get to a stage where you can have prisons, in other words, because you can still have prisons in local government areas and state owned by states, and we will still have the problem. So what's important is that different stakeholders, irrespective of who is controlling the prisons, should provide support to ensure that we have proper rehabilitation, have the proper things being done. So all right. At the moment,
okay, thank you very much, Dr. Uju Agombo, for joining us on the program. Now, before I let you go, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, when it comes to the issue of community service, the correctional center, is it recommending more of community service by inmates in the prison, in the correction center?
Yes, of course. That's the spirit of the law, which is very advisable, because a state like Lagos State has maximize the provisions for community service in their own Administration of Criminal Justice Law, 2011. In fact, the Lagos State has, Ministry of Justice, set up a community service center and have recruited social workers who monitor community service sentences. Now, when you sentence someone to community service, usually for offenses that are non-violent, you sentence someone to community service, like go and sweep the general hospital for a week or for a month, rather than go to prison. You need to monitor that the person is complying with that order, and you need a social welfare community officer to monitor that. So, creating those facilities, creating those rules, and providing funding for it is key to having this succeed. And having said that, it's not just about convicted prisoners. The remand prisoners should also be considered, so they don't just overcrowd the prisons.
All right, so much to learn about this. Thank you very much, Chino Obiago, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, for joining us on this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.